Good morning, Judith. It's very nice to meet you. I know we've
You
spoken
too.
on the phone, but this is the first
Yeah.
time we've seen each other live, I suppose.
Yes.
Um, a very early question about your early experiences. Um, when did you first discover that you had an aptitude and a desire to be a composer?
I actually don't ever know the answer to that. I did a lot of music when I was young, played the oboe and you know, often played in groups with my friends. We would try and get music together. And I think out of that experience doing arrangements, I started just writing pieces for people I knew. And but I carried on a lot of just enjoyable musical activity for a long time. I did a music degree. This is 50 years ago, and there was pretty much no original composition in the course. It was all harmony and counterpoint. In the end, I've realized that was quite good, but at the time, that's all we did really. And but out of maybe in my 20s, I realized I was spending more time on composition and less on the other things. So just gradually that became a thing.
And what was your first major success?
Um, well, it's difficult to think in terms of success. The pieces that I was happy with, um, I think I would have to go back to a piece for solo soprano called King Harold's Saga. I wrote it for a legendary singer, Jane Manning, who died just 2 or 3
Yes.
years ago.
Yeah.
And actually, she was in her 80s by then. I think she was probably still singing King Harold's Saga. And she sang that piece all over the world. And even today, people in other countries remember those performances. So I don't think when it was first performed, the reaction was, what a success. But it was Jane's enthusiasm for it that was like a rocket took off. And so I would choose that moment.
Well, that's wonderful. So, in terms of other composers or composing teachers, who were your major influences? First of all, when you began, and also have they changed over the years?
Well, again, that question is often posed, and it's somehow not quite to me the way it happens. When I was young, I listened to all kinds of music. I really did. It was a very exciting time for the what we used to call the avant-garde. You know, we were always hearing about composers like Stockhausen. I loved Berrioz's music,
Yeah.
um, and but classical music meant a lot to me, from earliest years, Bach, Mozart, and so on. And it was a great era for British pop music, I believe. We're looking back to the 1960s, we're going back all that time. And I really, as has been proved, because we're still talking about the Beatles and indeed some of the other groups of that time. So that mix was, you can't just choose one person out of that. It was a mix of music.
Yes, when I looked you up, I discovered that you're sickeningly 2 months younger than I am.
Oh, yes, a young one.
But
Yeah,
I do feel, I totally agree with you. It was a great time to grow up. The pop culture of the 60s mixed with the avant-garde. And I also believe that in nowadays composers are scared of writing music like that. So they tend to play safe. We get a lot of very dreamy choral music, which I don't know, it doesn't really interest me.
yeah. Completely agree. I think now it's so much in the forefront, the easy listening and perhaps also easy performing. To be fair to people writing for choral ensembles, I guess they get told a lot, "Ooh, this will be difficult, don't do that."
Mm.
And I think, as you say, oddly, I think singers are just dying to get their teeth into something. And so I completely agree with you. I also noticed that the young composers have so much training now. I mean, when I was young, literally, you couldn't go to a university and study just composition. You couldn't do a postgrad degree in it. I think the colleges did a bit of composition tuition, but it was quite restrained, really. And now I think it's the norm for young composers to go through really quite a few years of specific composition training. They are fantastically well qualified, but in some ways, I think it's holding some people back. Of course, there are many superb young composers, incredibly gifted, but I can see that you almost get taught so much that you don't know where to start. What is the real you, actually?
Well, yes. I mean, I think when we chatted on the phone, I may have told you that I came to music quite late, and I joined the London Philharmonic Choir and couldn't read music, and I had to
Hey,
learn quickly. And the
wow.
second piece I performed was a piece by David Bedford
Oh,
called Star Clusters, Nebulae, and Places in Devon, which is
I
as
think I can remember
avant-garde.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, avant-garde as
Mm.
it gets. And it just taught me just how to find notes from nowhere, how to
Yes.
use the different skills of
Yes.
trying to read the notes, but also listening to everything around you.
Yes.
And I do miss that. There's a lot of composers who are writing some really fantastic music then, who then started to play a bit safe. Now,
Yes.
what I love about your piece, the All the Ends of the Earth, is that it's just so wonderfully original. Um, but it also harks back to other periods. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Well, it very literally harks back. I was asked to write it by the BBC for a big day in their calendar, which was the 1st of January 2000. And they were celebrating all over Europe, all the radio stations, a whole millennium of music. So I thought for my piece, what music was there 1,000 years ago? And the earliest piece I actually knew, it's, I think probably late 12th century, is this music by Perotin, which he wrote for Notre Dame, the monks there, and particularly a piece called Viderant Omnes. And this must have been a fabulous piece at the time. It's the first piece we know in four parts. And of course, it's male voices. The bottom voice is a very, very slowly sung plain song, and then the three guys above sing much faster music. So, as music students, we learned that in our history lessons. Um, and I actually went to that piece and I thought, I wonder if I could take that plain song bit out, which I have done, and that's the music that the singers sing, the tenors and basses sing all the way through. And on top, I've added some of my own music. But you're right, that also harks back. A I took another psalm text in Latin, so it's a bit medieval-ish, and it pretty much sticks to one mode. So it has a kind of medieval feeling that you make the most you can out of a set of maybe 7 or 8 notes, which never are added to during the piece.
Well, Judith, it's a really, really beautiful piece, and it sort of harks back to the Britain, Abraham and Isaac, and some of the Stravinsky music,
Oh,
which goes back to Pergolesi and all those things. How do you feel about a massive choir doing this very intimate piece?
well, in a way, this is a world premiere of this happening. The piece was originally written for the BBC Singers, of course, great group. I imagine the very most for that concert, they will have had 24 singers. Generally, they have fewer. And these days, it could be even fewer singers than that because we see so many of these groups. Indeed, one is called the 16 because there are just 16 of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of my work has been written for that kind of scale. But it's wonderful if they cross the barrier into choral, symphonic chorus size. This has never happened before. And I think there's a reason, probably because the particularly the soprano and alto music is very taxing. It's actually almost like you need soloist type singers to sing
Yeah.
this. I can see that is quite a challenge for the average symphonic chorus. So it's rather exciting. It's extremely exciting that you've decided to take on this challenge.
Well, that's lovely for you to say that, Judith. The thing about Crouch and Festival Chorus is that we tackle virtually any kind of music. I mean, we really do. And I think last year we did Spem and Allium, which is another tricky piece, and we did it with sort of four voices per part. Um, but I think with your piece, when we've only rehearsed it once because we're having a bit of a hiatus at the moment. We come back to rehearsing
Yes.
next week. We've only rehearsed it once, and they just sight read the whole thing, which
Amazing.
amazed me
Yes.
because I think, and I looked at it on the page and I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit of a challenge, but they
Yes.
just sight read it. Now,
Incredible.
the funny thing about choirs is that they often sight read better than they
Ah,
take the second rehearsal. I
yes.
think it's a kind of three paces forward, two back.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've learned over the years with choirs is to accept that.
Yes.
And when I was a young conductor, I used to say, "Well, we did this last week. What's the matter with you?" I think, "Okay, let's do it again." Yeah,
Yes.
okay,
It
and
is
just a
funny.
lot more patient.
This is we can't go on discussing this, but I've found that even as an instrumentalist, I used to maybe pick up the instrument after not having played for some weeks, and it was actually great. But then the next time you realize, so I don't know, it's a fascinating phenomenon, actually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you have written, there's a piece that I want to do of yours, which we haven't programmed yet. Moon and Stars, is that
Oh,
the
Moon and
title?
Star. Well, again, that would be a very bold thing of you to do. That also was written for the BBC Singers, and it has an enormous orchestral part. And that is felt to be really a difficult piece. I know that it's been looked at by some of the famous symphony orchestras,
Yeah.
that we know, and they have, I'm afraid, put it aside, just saying it's just too taxing. But I'm beginning to think once again you will.
Well, you're scaring me now, Judith.
No, no, I don't mean to do
No, I'd love to do that because I think what I love about that piece and the piece that we're going to do is that your music has a very definite voice. Um, but it's not sort of pandering to the masses. It's basically producing something which you have enjoyed composing, we will enjoy performing, but it sort of has an integrity and it's not just sort of music by the yard, which I can't bear.
Well, thank you. I think, particularly with the two pieces we're discussing, uh, I didn't have and still don't have a mass following. In a way, it's a fortunate position to be in that I don't have these legions of fans who are expecting me to compose in a certain way. But on the other hand, there are people like yourselves, prepared to perform the pieces. So it is actually something I do at home, composing. I'm just have my own thoughts, and indeed, the pieces have to be as they are. They're not designed. They're designed to, as far as I can, design them to be practical. And I've learnt over the years, since I wrote some of the pieces we've mentioned, to write in a more practical way for choir. But I think that's as far as it goes.
But Judith, I think this level of independence, it does add to the integrity because as soon as people start demanding what they want from you,
Mm.
you lose your sense of ownership and creativity.
Indeed, and that I think is increasingly a problem with the situation of commissioning music. It's become very difficult for bodies or any kind of people, even the BBC, to find the funds to commission music. And so, inevitably, if they do commission something, they have very specific goals for that commission already that they don't, as I was given the chance, just say, hey, you're writing a piece for this broadcast, go away and do it. They will come with much more tailored requirements and demands. And I think that's another problem for our young composers before they've found their voice. They're kind of carrying out a set of requirements.
It's interesting you say that because this brings me on to your recent job, the
Ah,
Master of the Queen's and Stroke King's
yeah.
Music. I don't know how many people have ever overlapped
Ah,
more
yes.
before.
Mm.
Um, how did you cope with that? Because that is a mixture of, oh, we've got this pageantry thing happening next June. Can you write something for us? Did you enjoy that, or was it a challenge, or both?
Well, I think it was indeed a challenge, but an enjoyable mostly. The difficult part was the time. Some of those requests would come in not super late, but fairly late, and just the scheduling the time needed to not just for me to write the music, but for the editors and processors to get going on their work. Um, I treated quite a few of these little commissions, of which I must have done about 10 or 12 easily during the years I was there, a little bit like the exercises I did as a student. It was very particular requirements. I sort of knew the sound of the music that was needed. As we've been saying, I tried to do my own thing and was much encouraged. I mean, at the time, the head of music at Westminster Abbey was James O'Donnell, and he was a fantastically interesting musician, always interested in new stuff. So it wasn't like there were people standing in my way. But also, you do know if you have an event like the Queen's Jubilee, or indeed her funeral, or the
Yeah.
coronation,
Yes.
there's a certain style, and it's not exactly a musical style, but it's a way that the music will happen. It will, all those practical things come to the fore
Yeah.
again.
It's the occasion, isn't it? I think that's
Yes.
that's what it is. Now, I never met the Queen, and I'm sure you met her on numerous occasions, but I did meet the now King Charles once, and it also appears to me that he's probably more interested in music than his mother.
Well, he music is a particular love of his. I think it goes
Yeah,
beyond an interest. His incredible passion for music. So it's something that he really spends a lot of, I think, even his own time doing. But I always speak up for the late Queen's interest and support
okay.
of musicians. Um, a lot of the occasions I met her was when we went in for audiences with other musicians. So I would hear her talking to some of these incredibly distinguished people, and she had immense interest and understanding of their lives and what they did. And of course, at her age, she had met so many of the
Yeah.
world's great musicians. It was fascinating to get her on that subject. And of course, as well known, she apparently had a fantastic memory. So these people that she would have met, I don't know, Duke Ellington or Yehudi Menuhin,
Yeah.
Britain, of course, was somebody she knew. It was fantastic to talk to her about that. Um, and people in the classical business don't realize how much of this there is, but she was a fantastic supporter of things like the military bands at a time when they needed supporting, when there were huge defense cuts. I think her support meant a lot. And of course, those bands just got better and better in their musical standards in our time. So I tend to think of the 8 years that I worked for her. They were different from how the present king looks at music, but it I felt an enormous support for music from her.
Well, that's lovely to know. I did actually sing to her once.
Oh,
This is back in 1979. Do you remember
I do
1979?
indeed. Yes.
It was Sir Robert Mayor's 100th birthday.
Wow, that's
We did a
fantastic.
concert at the Royal Festival Hall,
Yes.
And the audience was full of who's who of musicians
Yes,
of
I bet.
the last 50 years, and
Yes,
Daniel Barenboim and Jacqueline Dupre, and
extraordinary.
it was wonderful, wonderful. Yes, and I was a very young, well, you work it out yourself, 25.
Fairly young.
And during the rehearsal in the afternoon, John Aldous, who was the conductor of London Philharmonic Choir, he said to me, he said, David, would you come and conduct Speminalium? Because I'd like to go out and listen to it.
Ah, yes, yes, yes.
And that was one of my very first conducting experiences.
Isn't that
It was
marvelous?
wonderful.
Well, I think
Uh,
these big occasions that so many people have wonderful memories. I met some, gentlemen older than us even, who told me about being choristers in the late Queen's coronation in 1953. It stays with us all for our lives. So there's a huge importance to that.
I have a very, very boring question for you.
Yeah.
When I remember reading a biography of Benjamin Britten, and I was really excited to hear about when he was composing the War Requiem. How did he do it? And it was quite sort of mundane. He'd say, I'd get up in the morning, I'd have breakfast, I'd answer a few letters, play a bit of tennis, go
Oh,
back, close a bit of War Requiem, go for a walk. And it was so matter of fact, I was almost disappointed. And it probably taught me that actually being a composer is a much more kind of mundane function in a way. How
it
did
is.
your day develop like that?
Yes, it is quite clerical in a way, because there is so much writing. I still write by hand. I enjoy that. But most of my younger colleagues sit at a screen, as I'm doing at the moment. Um, but you have to put in the hours, and for those larger scale works, it's many hours, often a day. Now, in my, I'm not going to say to you old age, but I really keep the number of particularly deadline dates to a minimum so that I can you, do fewer hours and but it has to be a rhythm that you always go back to and just seems normal. Yeah, and I'm sure that's the case actually for a huge range of composers, apart from those who work in those very demanding areas like TV music, film music, where the deadlines will be very extreme.
So how, this is a tricky question, really. When you've composed a piece, and you sort of unleash it, you hand it over to a conductor or an ensemble. How strong is your sense of ownership of the piece, and how much do you want to encourage the performers to see it for themselves?
Well, I think the when the piece is absolutely new, I go along really in the sense of making sure the parts are right and that there's nothing I put in that I thought was going to work and doesn't. So it's a very editorial role at that point. But later on, actually, I'm very happy to leave it to everybody else. For instance, tempi vary enormously. Uh, if I come to a rehearsal, it's often the very first question of the conductor is this the right tempo? And of course, I write tempo markings in the score, but those are just an indication. Um, but I tend to think, unless it's wildly hindering the piece, you try it at that speed, see how it goes. I think after those first one or two performances where I feel I must just assert
Yeah,
some kind of
look after
um,
your offspring.
yes, exactly. Thereafter, and of course, like all composers, absolutely delighted if performances come up along, say several decades later. I feel like it's almost a different person and not myself who wrote that. It's left
Yeah.
to me in a way.
It's very interesting, Judith, because I try very hard to follow what the composer wants, and then
Yeah.
I listen to a recording by the composer conducting their own piece, and they're
Yes.
way off what
Yeah,
they
yeah.
write in their scores. So
Yes.
that, in a way, that sort of gives me the license to do what I want with the piece. In
Yes.
a way, obviously with due respect to the composer,
Yes.
but I want to feel it going in a certain direction.
Yes, indeed. I think there was a sort of era in history when we got very excited that the composer conducted this performance or something, and now we've realized that that was just on a certain day. Somebody like, well, I would think Stravinsky always conducted exactly the same way, but
Well,
Brit
his Symphony of Psalms, he's some one recording he's bang on his own metronome markings, another one he's way off. So you're right, it is. It depends on the day, depends on the weather,
yes,
depends on the building.
the building very much so,
Uh,
absolutely.
When we spoke on the telephone, you said that, did you say to me that you were going to be writing something for a large choir? Or
Yes, and it's funny you've just mentioned the name of it, and it's the London Philharmonic Chorus. I'm not sure we should be doing a whole lot about this because it's in a couple of seasons' time. They haven't announced their season yet, but that is the one.
okay, so it's still top secret, is it?
Well, I think it's not something there'll be an announcement of at the moment, but yeah.
So what do you think are the joys and the challenges of writing for a very large chorus as opposed to something like the BBC Singers?
Well, this is something I've done less of actually, so I'm really trying to think about that. You mentioned when we spoke before, very interestingly, the possibility that a large chorus can sing sustained, really quiet music for a long time, which you clearly can't if you've just got 16 singers, however fantastic they are. So that interests me, just the sheer lung power that you've got on the stage. Um, at the moment, another idea that I'm thinking about, so interesting to hear a whole lot of, say, altos or a whole lot of basses singing on their own. I'm quite interested to give them quite big solo sections, just a sound that you don't often hear. Um, I love pieces like in the say the Brahms Requiem, sometimes you'll hear just quite a long line that's passed from the altos to the tenors, or can't remember, maybe the other way around, but that kind of thing's fascinating sound quality. I
Yes.
should ask you what are the things I
Well,
should be looking for?
I think I think that you shouldn't restrict yourself at all. I think
No,
you should write what you like and make sure
yeah,
that the person who's in charge of the choir enables, if they're as mean and demanding as I am, that,
yes,
that they actually achieve what you want. Because
yeah,
I think that there are very, very few pieces which a symphonic choir can't do,
yeah,
really. But it just takes time. So
yes.
I wouldn't hold back on your ambition.
Yes, yes,
Mm.
thank you. No, that's very helpful. They are who they are for a reason, and we should go with that. That's absolutely true.
Yes. Yes. So Judith, do you know yet if you're able to come to our
Yeah, I'm
concert?
so sorry. This is so mad, but I have a first night in Germany that, not a premiere or anything, but there's still a possibility that I would go to that. But I'll know very soon and I can send you
It's
the news
fine.
about that. But
Obviously, we'd love to have you there,
yeah, and
but
I'd love to
um,
hear you.
I think we've probably reached the end of our time. I don't know where it's all
We
gone.
probably have indeed. No, we clearly one of those conversations we could carry
Yeah.
on.
But
But
it's been really lovely, lovely
my
talking
pleasure.
with you, and I hope it's the first of many times that we will
It
meet
would be
and
lovely.
collaborate.
Really, thank you, David, for your interest in this piece, and it was
It's
great
a
to speak
it's a
to you.
pleasure, and
Thank
it's
you.
just so nice to meet you, and
You
somebody
too.
who's exact contemporary. I
There
find
we
that
go.
terribly exciting.